Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We come on the air with another adventure on the Dr. Sky Experience. We like to call it Theater of the Mind, opening our minds to the many mysteries of the world that we live in. Here on this blowtorch of radiant energy, Talk Radio 77 WABC. Tonight's adventure with a great guest for our 2 hours as we explore the wonders of aviation history. In hour number 1 with author Bill Yenni, and in hour number 2 we launch ourselves into space with author and space journalist Rod Pyle. In hour number 2 we'll give you the best update we can on what's happening with the medical emergency on board the International Space Station. The contact number, as always, is 1-800-848-9222. That's 1-800-848-9222. And let me thank our helmsmen, both Tony and Bill, navigating the signal of 77 WABC here and around the nation, around the world, and I'm even confident, well out into the cosmos. A great show, ladies and gentlemen, for you. But as we quickly transition, that is, to what's happening in the heavens, we find out that the planet Jupiter is still dominant. It's your sky treasure for the month of January, in my opinion. Where is it? If you have clear skies, wherever you're listening to us, it is the distinctly bright object that you see nearly overhead and still to the western part of the United States, obviously into the southeastern part of the sky. More and more, we look into the heavens. Also, the brilliant star Sirius, the most brilliant star in the heavens, nothing brighter other than the sun. And the large star factory inside the great constellation of Orion the Hunter. Very interesting things as we move into the winter of this year, in January of 2026. Late-breaking news on the sun, a minor C-class flare on the sun has now reached the Earth. Nothing to worry about. It's creating a G1 of the major geostorms. This is the weakest of all possible storms. And it has combined with another CME, coronal mass ejection. They call that a cannibal CME. The listeners of Talk Radio 77 WABC in higher northern latitudes, if you have clear skies, you may be witnessing the aurora borealis. And a programming note, listen to my updates every Sunday morning on the Cats Roundtable, thanks to owner and operator John Katsimatidis. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about something I find very near and dear to many who served our nation. We're talking about the pilots of World War II that flew one of the most iconic aircraft of all time, the Boeing B-17 bomber. I'm sure you've watched many, many movies, documentaries about the brave pilots that flew these particular aircraft and the life expectancy that they really didn't have. According to many reliable sources, B-17 crew life expectancy was incredibly low, especially in 1943, averaging around 11 missions with only 1 in 4 crewmen surviving their required 25-mission tour over Europe, facing heavy losses to anti-aircraft carrier and aircraft fire, flak and German fighters. The first half of the war saw particularly high attrition, but advances in fighter escort and tactics improved the odds later through the dangers, and those dangers, of course, remain very high. An interesting story, ladies and gentlemen, as we do a brief bio of our special guest, Bill Yenni. According to the Wall Street Journal, Bill Yenni writes with a cinematic vividness. Bill Yenni is the author of more than 36 nonfiction books, as well as a dozen novels. His work has been selected for Chief of Staff of the Air Force Reading List. He's the recipient of the Air Force Association's Gil Rob Wilson Award for the most outstanding contribution in the field of arts and letters as an author who works, and his works have shaped how thousands of Americans understand and appreciate U.S. air power. Thank you for joining us, Bill. Good evening to you, and good morning to our listeners. How are you?
Well, I'm doing fine, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. You make me sound important.
Well, I think you are, and I think a lot of people, as they do, continually hear you. And again, of all the authors that we have in this particular area, we've followed you for many, many years. I've read a number of your books and find it quite fascinating. But, Bill, this is interesting. You have a number of books that are all about the B-17, and I'd like to highlight some of those books in this conversation with our audience. And I wonder, ladies and gentlemen, out there, how many of you have family members which were assigned to B-17s, B-24s, B-26s, fighter aircraft of World War II? Your story is welcome here in your memories to share, as of course we honor those particular individuals that fought against great odds to this great country, the United States of America. Bill, talk about some of these books that you've written. If we go back in the chronology, it looks like the first one on the B-17 was simply a book entitled B-17 at War, and that's back in 2006. Talk about this aircraft so people understand it better.
Yeah, that was an illustrated book that was sort of an overview of the B-17's war career, against the backdrop of the strategy that it was used to execute. That strategy being the systematic destruction of the German war economy. It had been theorized that before the war that to defeat an enemy, you could take the war deep behind the battlefield into the enemy's industrial heartland and affect the outcome of battles on the battlefront by reducing the enemy's access to war machines. In other words, blowing up his ammunition factories, blowing up his petroleum industry, and crippling his ability to wage war, and doing that without before the enemy was able to bring the tanks and guns to the battlefield. They would have been destroyed along with the means to produce those. This was a theory that was bought into by men like General Hap Arnold, who commanded the U.S. Army Air Forces during World War II, and by many of his commanders. So they organized a strategic air campaign against the German war machine, and the key weapon in that war was the strategic bomber, 4-engine bombers, long range, heavy bomb load. The two aircraft that were part of that scheme were the Boeing B-17 and the consolidated B-24 Liberator. And they were assigned to an organization called the 8th Air Force. U.S. Army Air Forces, plural, contained 16 air forces. The largest was the 8th. It's based in England, and its mission was to bomb German assets in the heart of Germany and throughout occupied Europe. And that was what they did. And as you pointed out, it was a very, very difficult, deadly job for the men who flew those bombers. A lot of them didn't make it back. Most of them didn't, and that was a terrible thing. But they kept at it, and ultimately they prevailed.
Well, this is fascinating, and I'd like to get into the description of age for the average pilots and the crew members on these B-17s. I mean, am I saying correctly that without making a mistake here, they were what? In their 20s and early 30s for the most part? Is that fairly accurate?
Well, I'd say if there was anybody in their early 30s, that was an old man.
Yeah.
A lot of the enlisted men who were gunners on these planes were in their late teens. The officers who piloted and navigated and sat in the bombardier chair, these men were definitely mostly in their early 20s. 25 or 26 would be a little bit on the aged side, but they were early 20s, these men.
We give a great tribute to those that lost their lives, of course. And all of the American military that fought in these hellacious wars. But when we look at the history of the B-25 and the B-17 in this case, we're talking about what? Some 12,000 of these aircraft were manufactured, and that's a whole nother show and a whole nother subject. I mean, many women, of course, were actively involved during the war. Blessings to them to help the war machine to grow. But Bill, 12,000 of these aircraft, and according to statistics, there's only a couple of these that are still flying. I mean, they're very, very old and need to be well maintained. But let's go back and do a deep dive into these individuals. I mean, in that particular time, whether you were drafted, it's not necessarily just a draft number that somebody had. So many of these individuals, simply wanted to go fight for their country. Am I correct? I mean, that's like an understatement. They volunteered to go in, not necessarily everybody who was conscripted to go by law. So that's even more fascinating. Talk about that, if you would.
Well, the people who were drafted in most instances ended up in the infantry. But there were a lot of men who volunteered for the Air Corps, and interestingly, there were a lot of men who had volunteered for the Aviation Cadet Corps before the war, and that was the nucleus of the pilot navigator corps of the Air Corps, and they were by and large volunteers, and they had volunteered for flight training before the war began, and they were in the pipeline to become the aircrews who won the war.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Yenni, if you're just joining us on the Dr. Sky Experience, he, of course, is an aviation author with more than 36 books, nonfiction books also, as well as 12 novels. He joins us, his website, BillYenni.com, to learn so much more about him. But what could be more important than that, ladies and gentlemen, is you, the audience out there of this particular radio archive. Your questions and comments and maybe some stories we'd love to hear of relatives that fought in the war and actually may have been involved in this particular aspect of aviation at 1-800-848-9222. A fascinating journey, of course. And Bill, I know you've been up in a B-17. I've been up a number of times in a B-17 here in Arizona and around the nation. And I find that to be amazing when you get into this aircraft. For those that have never had the experience, I mean, you're looking at this amazing machine built, in the 1930s and 40s, 4 piston engines, very powerful, Wright Cyclone engines. Am I correct on that?
Yeah.
And carrying an incredible amount of ordnance. That's amazing. And the aircraft skin on there is extremely thin. I mean, you could actually tap on the side, press it with your finger. So can you imagine flying these missions night and day? I can't only imagine. I can't even imagine what these pilots went through.
Yeah, and if you, as you and I both know, having been inside of a B-17, it is not spacious. It's very, very crowded, tight quarters. Because relative to the jetliners that we are all familiar with, it was a small airplane. It was huge for its time, but smaller than the average 737 or Airbus 320, and very crowded quarters in there. And it's amazing to think about being in something like that with a skin like you're describing, and when somebody is shooting at you with cannon shells, and the Luftwaffe fighters were all equipped with cannons, and so you're in there being shot at by another guy with a cannon.
It's totally amazing.
That's got to be pretty scary.
It is. I want you to describe something, because for those that have never been inside one of these aircraft, there's a particular part of the aircraft which is called the ball turret. And those gunners, and I'm reading this, high-risk roles, the ball turret gunners face particularly high mortality, sometimes reaching 60%. Now, for those of you listening that have no idea what this is, on the belly, well, you can describe it better. They're these twin, 50 caliber machine guns. And I looked inside. They asked me if you wanted to climb in there, and I'm 6 foot. And I told them, no, thank you. But the individual probably had to be smaller in stature. But how many hours did they have to stay in there? True. Describe that.
Well, you had to spend 6 or 8 hours. You would crawl into those things, not at takeoff, but as you were nearing the target, and you'd be in there in some cases for hours and hours. And to describe the ball turret, it's a thing that's it's a ball, it's a sphere, sure. And it's pretty much all plexiglass, and it's about 3 feet in diameter, maybe less. Excuse me. And
sure.
There's nothing inside except 2 M2 50 caliber machine guns and a small guy. And the small guy, yes, they were small. I've known several ball turret gunners, and they were all very, very much close to or below 5 feet. They picked the smallest guy and to crawl in there. And just imagine folding yourself into a ball like that.
No, thank you.
2 machine guns,
right.
And you're on the bottom of the airplane. So here you are in a glass ball, looking down tens of thousands of feet at the ground and the clouds, and at the German fighters coming up to shoot at you. And there's a whole basket full of phobias that come into mind there. Claustrophobia, fear of heights, fear
Absolutely.
of death, fear of falling thousands of feet.
No, it's amazing. And we've watched so many movies. I mean, look at the Memphis Belle. We've seen in particular reference to that movie. What's sad in that movie, if people haven't seen it, we don't want to be a spoiler, but it has something to do with the person trapped in the ball turret, correct?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. So when you're if you are trapped in the ball turret, there's a hatch. There's a metal hatch on top, which we have all seen when we've flown in a B-17. And you open that hatch, and then you climb in, and the lid pulls shut, and you're in there. And what happens if the lid jams and you can't get out? Well, then here you are. Here's the airplane that's about to land, and you're on the bottom of this airplane. And if there's any problem with the landing gear, you're squashed like a bug.
Bill, it's incredible. I mean, the stories and the books that you have written, and the ones to come, are just so incredible. So all of our aviation fans and enthusiasts out there, maybe we have pilots that have maybe other people in their family, we would love to hear from you, and the phone lines are lighting up here. Always time, ladies and gentlemen, to listen to you, your questions and comments, and maybe even getting into a dialogue of people's experiences with their families, maybe grandparents or uncles and aunts that fought for America in this most incredible time with these incredible aircraft. What I'm amazed about, Bill, before we go to the bottom of the hour break here in about 5 or 6 minutes, is just this whole story about how these individuals, talking more about the psyche of those people. I mean, they'd get into the cockpit, all the crew is there, there's a tail gunner too, and you know it. I remember walking and just doing this visually for the listeners who's never been inside there. We were strapped in toward the back, and then when the pilot said we're at a certain altitude, you can get up and walk around. So I wanted to navigate through the Bombay door area, the little walkway, the plank, and go to the front where the pilots were. And you're right. It's very cramped, so you better make sure you have something on your head, like a helmet or something, because those turbulence during that will bang your head. So here I am walking across that little plank, and the person said to me, with the camera in your hand, if you drop it, well, if it goes, don't reach for it. And you know why? Obviously, the people may not know this, but the doors snap open, and here I am about 10,000 feet looking down going, I think I'll stay in my seat. So
yeah, you're standing on a catwalk that's barely wider than a cell phone, and you're looking straight down, and you've got all that turbulence surging in, and wow, it's not for the faint of heart. And Meanwhile, you're surrounded by racks and racks and racks of 500-pound bombs.
Yeah, we didn't have that experience, but the truth of the matter is not to be afraid of it. I was just amazed at how the airplane could get off the ground. But a little tribute, Bill, I know you know so much about this. The same aircraft that we flew with an unnamed company, I don't want to put them in the spotlight here. We flew on this aircraft, which is a B-17 called the 909, and you know it. But sadly, it's our memorial back on October 9th, 2019, with a crew and also some guests that would go on these special patriotic rides like civilians. The airplane crashed at the Bradley International Airport in Windsor Locks, Connecticut. 7 souls perished, and I know some people did survive, but that was horrible because I was on that same aircraft about 2 or 3 months before that and knew that, everything seemed to be well. So that's our tribute to those that perished. And these air shows, I'm not against the air shows, Bill. I mean, you've been to so many. My brother, of course, does the photorecon.net website. We'll promote that for military aviation, photorecon.net. But it's amazing. We're hearing many, many accidents happening with these type of warbird aircraft, and that's not a reason not to be interested in them. It's just that I'm hoping and praying that people are doing every possible check, but you never can tell, right? But let's not be afraid of flying, right?
Yes, that's not.
Absolutely. 1-800-848-9222 if you're just joining us, and we promise we will get to people like George in Maine, Dale in Rye, New York, Tom in New Jersey, and many, many other people that I'm sure that would like to get some questions answered or share some stories as we memorialize the pilots of this particular aircraft in World War II, the B-17, with our very special guest, Bill Yenni. He can be found at BillYenni.com. And we'll get into a conversation later, Bill, with You're Okay. You're also a fiction writer, and you have some very interesting Western fiction to discuss with us here on this radio show.
Yeah, I could talk to you about that.
Absolutely. And let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, the other type of aircraft. I know you've been in them. We've also flew in the B-24, one of the very few called Witchcraft that's still around. I believe it's still around. Another amazing aircraft of the day. But, Bill, the floor goes to you. This is so amazing in the couple of minutes we have. I mean, just tell us the passion that you have for aviation. I never got to ask that. And I'm sure, just like the Wall Street Journal said, you write with cinematic vividness. Tell us that quickly.
Well, I would have to say that when I was a kid, I developed this kind of little boy's fascination for airplanes and built plastic model kits and read all the William Green books. He was one of the first authors to write these technical books for a mass audience about World War II airplanes. And I collected lots of his books, and I read them over and over, and I studied the pictures, and I built my plastic models, and I talked to all my friends about them. And, well, the thing that happened to me later was that when it came to that sort of thing, I never grew up. I continued with my fascination, and I love
aviation, right? It's amazing.
I fell into writing about it because I was just as fascinated as I'd always been about the airplanes, and I became very fascinated with our topic of conversation here tonight: the people who flew them and the people who used them effectively to win wars.
When we come back, ladies and gentlemen, Bill Yenni, our special guest, as I've mentioned proudly here, we'll talk about some of his other books, one called Big Week, 6 Days That Changed the Course of World War II, his book in 2012, also available by checking him out at BillYenni.com. And ladies and gentlemen, we will get to you, the callers, as we go on the other side of this break. We will be right back here. I'm Steve Cates, Dr. Sky, here on the Dr. Sky Experience, proudly on this particular blowtorch of radiant energy, Talk Radio 77 WABC. We'll be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Why, it's a flying fortress. Richard Williams, reporter for the Seattle Times, upon seeing the B-17's heavy armament, he called it a flying fortress. That's where it comes from. 32 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen, Bill Yenni, our special guest. The Wall Street Journal says about him, and I quote, Bill Yenni writes with cinematic vividness. And we continue with you, ladies and gentlemen. Let's say good morning to George in the cold state of Maine. You're on with Bill Yenni. Thanks for your patience. How are you doing this morning?
Gentlemen, this is an unbelievable show, and it has to be archived. First, if we're going to write the history of World War II, let's never forget the Civil Air Patrol protected America's borders. Yes. The Eagle squadrons, never talked about. These were young guys who fought in World War II before we were in World War II. They walked across the border into Canada, and they joined the Royal Canadian Air Force. They were our first pilots over in the European theater. And also, let's never forget, how did we get all these great young pilots? Where did we get them from? Off the baseball field? Off the football field?
Right.
They were all inspired, these young guys, 20 years younger, 10 years earlier, 5 years, by the lone eagle, Charles Lindbergh. They all wanted to become pilots. He was their big hero. They all learned how, a lot of American kids were learning how to fly planes. It might be hard to believe today, but they're playing games, electronic games, but those guys wanted to be pilots. And the first ones went to Canada and the Canadian Air Force. Now, I'm going to tell you something. We had unbelievable pilots. At a certain point, the escorts really protected those guys. And I want to give you two good quotes before you come back to me.
Sure.
There are many great young pilots, but there are no bad old pilots. And the other quote is an actual exchange between two American boys in World War II. And just think about these guys. This is a World War II Marine. He's talking to an American who's in the Army Air Corps. And the Marine's telling the Air Corps guy, come on, man, you get to sleep in hot, warm beds. You get 3 hot square meals a day. You have access to the best commissaries. Then the Marine goes to the Army Air Corps guy. Well, what do you do? And the Air Corps guy goes, ball turret gunner. He goes, you could go to hell.
You're right. Stay with us here, George. I want our guest Bill to jump in on this. Bill, obviously people love these stories, and just by the sound of what George is telling us, please continue. This is awesome conversation.
Yeah, well, the ball turret gunner that's in that anecdote, he did get his 3 square meals a day when he was at his base in England. But if he was one of those high percentage of guys who got shot down, he wound up in a German stalag where his hot meals a day were a lot fewer and far between than they were at his home base, and a lot of guys spent years and years in those German prison camps. So it all balanced out. Marines.
Nobody can imagine, right, George, what these people went through. I mean, imagine being up 25, 30,000 feet and wearing an oxygen mask with the tanks, of course, behind you, hitting all that flak in the air. I mean, the videos and the television shows, I can only imagine how realistic they are. Imagine how it really was. George, you got the last word on this, and thanks for bringing this to our attention.
Okay, guys, and also let's not forget the American boys flew the most dangerous daytime flights over the canal and when they were bombing in World War II. We got to also talk about the guys who escorted them in the Mustangs or the Lightnings, Thunderbolts. These guys are unbelievable. Some guys, there was one guy they didn't give him, I know why they didn't give him the Medal of Honor. What he did on one day protecting those bombers and escorted them, gentleman Don Gentile, one of the great pilots. He was also with the Canadian squadrons. He came from Wisconsin. They didn't give him the Medal of Honor. He should have got it. We know why they didn't give it to him. But anyway, guys, I just want to finish up with this. America was fascinated by flying. Lindbergh is like the big hero when he flies across the Atlantic. The American kids, I knew so many guys, I knew older guys who much older than me who became pilots because of Lindbergh. They wanted to be just like Charles Lindbergh.
You say it so well.
People who were pilots. Yeah. These guys were unbelievable, patriotic Americans. But let's never forget the ingenuity of the American kids, the ability to fly those planes back with the damage. If you saw some of the damage on that plane, you wouldn't believe they were able to bring them back, but they did.
That's amazing. You say it so well, George, and I appreciate you. Hope you'll always be part of the Dr. Sky experience. And thank you for taking us down memory lane, and our salute to these young men and, of course, the women who built these aircraft and other parts of of service that the women, of course, participated in, all for the cause of American victory. Thank you, George. Let's go to Dale in Rye, New York. Good morning, Dale. Thanks for your patience, and you're on with Bill Yenni.
Good morning, Dr. Sky and Bill. This is just a little short story. My father's friend, Bill McVicker, who was flew B-17s in World War II, he was telling me one time that he was flying through flak and he would just get so frustrated because he was just sitting there and flying. Everybody else was shooting the guns around at all the aircraft and everything. And the flak would be flying up around him. He'd just get so pissed off, he'd pull out his .45 and put his arm out the window, just shoot his .45 down to the ground.
That's amazing. Wow. Now, there's a man that I'd like to know better. No, that's incredible because I can't imagine this, right, Dale? They're up there in that high altitude. And let's talk about night flying. I mean, the explosion of the flak is around you. You're seeing some of the crew members get shot at, the dodging the bullets, the heavy fire from 20-millimeter chain guns or whatever the cannons were on those German aircraft. It's almost mind-boggling to think that these young people were commanding this. And like we said before, not to be redundant, a high percentage of them never made it back. And they had, 25, am I right on this, Bill? 25 mission requirements? That was like your scorecard?
Yeah, and then you had those people like Rosie Rosenthal, who finished 25 missions, and he had gone over there to fight the Nazis. He was a Jewish kid from New York. He decided that after he finished his 25, he'd sign up for another 25, and he did.
Now, there's a man I admire more than ever. You bet. Wow. Dale, your closing comment or question as we move forward? Appreciate you.
I was just going to make a comment that guy that signed up for another 25, that clanging sound you heard was his brass balls.
And then he probably would have signed up for another 25 missions. Let's say good morning to Tom in New Jersey. You've been patient. You're on with author Bill Yenni on the B-17, another warbird aircraft. How are you?
Yes, good evening. This is Tom from New Jersey. Yes. My Uncle John was a ball turret gunner in the World War II, and he had some interesting things to say. He actually was shot down and parachuted over Belgium. But I asked maybe a guy, he was shot by some type of bullet that was not a explosive bullet. It was some kind of a flare or something that guns shoot every so many times. He was lucky enough to do that.
Tracer rounds, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Tracer rounds. There you go. Tracer rounds. So he was lucky. And then the pilot in his plane actually stayed in the plane until it went down, which we didn't survive. He did. But he had a little bit of a book story. He parachuted in Belgium. Some people took him. They hid him in his barn for like a couple of weeks until the Americans were able to get that far and do that. So I was wondering about it. So that tracer round was unique. I was wondering to ask your gentleman how many people from ball turrets actually survived this type of attack where most of the plane went down.
Good question, Tom. Very good.
Well, I think the percentage would have been very, very, very small.
Yeah, it's amazing. And
unless you could get out of a ball turret, and if the plane is falling out of the sky, it's hard to move around in it, and it's doubly, triply, quadruply harder to get out of a ball turret. So I would say most of them.
Well, Tom, I wouldn't want to get
that.
I wouldn't want to get near it, Bill. I mean, we looked at it on the B-17, and I thought the pilot was telling me as if it was a joke. He goes, "You want to climb in there?" And I said, "Well, no, I'm a little claustrophobic."
Well, you were too big.
No, it's amazing, Tom. So your final comment? I mean, please continue because we appreciate our guests and our callers.
About 5'6". He joined when he was like below the age. His mother had a sign for him. I think that's why he did that. He was actually the type of person that could crawl into one of those spaces and do it. Now, question though, he said he still had shrapnel in his leg after World War II. Is that possible, or is he just talking as a World War II veteran?
Yes, a lot of people came home with metal in their bodies from exploding shells.
That's amazing.
It was just, it was in too deep and it was too hard to extract. Talk to a surgeon sometime about it. Ask him, and you'll get the graphic details.
Well, Tom and Bill, I wanted you guys, Bill, obviously our guest, apparently one of the German tactics was to ram the vertical, the back of the airplane and do that as many times as possible just to shear off the whole back end. I mean, that's a maneuver that I don't know how anybody could survive if that happens from an enemy aircraft. Isn't that true, Bill? They would try to, attack the rear end of the airplane by force.
I know that it did. I know that it did happen. I don't know that it was ever an established tactic. It was done, and ramming bombers was not infrequent. But I don't think there was an organized tactic to do that. A lot of times, if a German fighter plane ran out of ammunition, the pilot would ram a bomber.
Amazing. The horrors of war. But we're talking today, ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, Bill Yenni, our special guest and author of many, many books, and particularly talking about B-17, the survival of these young pilots, and the improbability that they'd come back and finish 25 missions. A great story. Tom in New Jersey, thanks for being part of the show. We appreciate your questions and giving us some of your experiences on a subject like this. We hope you'll be part of future programs as we talk about the wonders and mysteries that are all surrounding us, with also a little dab of American exceptionalism. Thank you, Bill. When we come back, I'd like to jump into this particular topic. We can tease it if you'd like for about a minute and a half. 6 days that changed the course of World War II. What's the early part of that book about? Well, what happened?
That's the big week was an organized effort by the 8th Air Force in February 1944 to, it was a maximum effort plan. The idea was to get maximum number of bombers on and send them out day after day for a week. That's why they called it Big Week. And to attack the German, the German industrial machine, as I previously described it, and because all through 1943, they would muster small numbers of bombers, and they flew their missions. They did destroy targets. But the idea behind Big Week was a total, huge, maximum effort to get as many bombers as possible out day after day after day for a week.
Amazing story. More with Bill Yenni, our very special guest on the Dr. Sky Experience. More when we come back after these important announcements.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Without the B-17, we might have lost the war. A quote from General Carl Spaatz, commander of the U.S. Strategic Air Forces in Europe. 48 minutes after the hour, Bill Yenni continues with us to the top of the hour, his website, BillYenni.com, on all his great books and so much more. Let's go to the phones right now, Bill, and let's say hello as we talk with Paula in Mississippi. How are you this morning down there in the South?
I'm very well, thank you. And I had the privilege of knowing the crew of the Memphis Belle in 1988 up until 2004. And to try to keep this short and sweet, these men were incredible, and their stories. But I was known as Rosie the D-Riveter when the Memphis Belle was taken apart for restoration and moved to Millington, Tennessee, before it went to Dayton, Ohio. But anyway, some of the most interesting tours that I led around the fuselage came from World War II veterans.
Yes.
And I learned more than what I was trying to tell the visitors that I took on tour. But the most interesting tour was to a blind lady who went blind in her early 20s, but she knew colors and smells, and I showed her an entrance 50 caliber and the exit of a 50 caliber, and she bumped her head, and I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot to tell you to duck." But no, the very incredible men that were on there, deaf as a post, the Harold Locke, the top turret gunner, couldn't hear a thing. and Robert Hanson, the radio operator. But these people, that young men who went to war and were still proud of going to war in their 80s and early 90s, I had the privilege of visiting with, and I live on my memories these days, and those are some of the best.
Stay with us, Paula. What you're saying here is really incredible, and I want to salute you for everything that you're doing to keep alive the spirit of what we're talking about here. This is totally amazing. As a derivator, that's even more interesting. I love that story. Isn't that incredible, Bill?
Yeah.
So, why don't you two talk? I mean, I'll stop talking, and between you, Paula, and Bill, I mean, you have a lot of stuff to share here with us and Bill back, so please continue.
Well, you were lucky to meet the people who were involved in those missions, and people who came to visit the Memphis Belle during that time that you were associated with it really benefited from your experience and in talking to the others, but mostly I think they benefited from your enthusiasm about stories, which I'm hearing here tonight.
Yes.
Well, but one amazing story is when the Memphis Belle was on Mud Island, there would be World War II veterans that were disabled that would come to the Belle, put their hands on it, and cry. And they couldn't stand before, but they wanted to touch their aircraft.
Wow.
Their aircraft. They were young. They didn't get their cars. They didn't get to go on that many dates and all of that. That was their youth. They were touching and very admirable. And they knew it, but that was their memories. And I heard a lot of their stories. Not a lot of them told them, but the visitors that would come, and we had our docents on Mud Island, World War II veterans that were with the B-17 tail gunner, the ball turret gunner, I mean, all of them. And it was, at the time, especially 9/11, people came to the Belle. My husband and I didn't play the music when we would lower the Bombay doors because we had an act, so to speak, to Glenn Miller's music.
Beautiful.
But people came and they realized then the sacrifice that our World War II veterans.
And we're lucky to have people like you to relate those stories about the veterans and their connection to these airplanes from that war, and just the fact that so few of those airplanes survive, but that the ones who do survive are in places where people can see them and feel them and touch them and experience all of that you've been talking about. That's
it's amazing.
Great stories.
Paula, thank you for keeping living history alive. It's just so incredible that you're calling to talk about this, and I'm honored, by what you've done and what you do to keep everything alive. And every young person should experience this and learn exactly what our forefathers did to keep tyranny and fascism and all other things from the Japanese side in World War II so that America can remain the freest country and continue to talk about American exceptionalism. Paula, if you're with us, blessings to you, and thank you for sharing those stories. I'm honored.
Yes, thank you.
Well, Bill, this is fascinating. The hour goes so quickly, and obviously trying to get out as much as, but I'd let you have the floor here. Of course, you're our guest, so we only have about a few more minutes, but share with us some of the other things that are going on in your life and how people, again, can get in touch with you. I appreciate your time.
Well, they can find me on, well, actually, you talked a little bit about my Western novels. It's something completely different than all of the writing that I've done about the Second World War. But it goes back to the 1870s and to, well, it's fiction that it celebrates the American individual.
Those are great stories. The great men of the mountains in the 19th century, the cowboys, the bounty hunters, the men who made the West their own, and about whom the unique stories of American individualism are told. And I have a series of books about a man who wound up as a bounty hunter, and he was famously known as a man who could not be long in one place. And the series is called The Trails of a Restless Bounty Hunter. Incredible. And you're a man from Montana, your birthright and birthplace. It's a story of the West. We'll do that, of course, in future iterations, and we'd love to have you back. And, Bill, there's so many things we haven't talked about. I mean, I had the privilege, and I'm sure you have, of meeting what allegedly was the best stick and rudder man of all time, Bob Hoover. And for those of you who don't know who we're talking about here, for the air shows where we covered Reno, the Reno air races for many, many years, and we would see Bob Hoover every year in his straw hat, and I looked when I didn't know anything about him, I was like, who's that guy? And he gets up and he rode and flew what? A North American Rockwell Commander, I guess. And I never saw those air shows, but apparently he put on some amazing air shows, described by many, even by Chuck Yeager, as the best stick and rudder man, I guess, around. Would you not agree?
He was a legend. He was a legendary pilot, and to see him fly, and to see him in person, just on the flight line, larger than life is actually an understatement when you're talking about Hoover.
Absolutely. And to learn more about that and what Bill's talking about, BillYenni.com. And not selfishly, but proudly, my own brother's website. He covers it from the aviation photography side. Check out, ladies and gentlemen, photorecon.net. I'm sure you'll appreciate all the correspondence there on military aviation and who does it best. I know my brother would probably say, yeah, Bill, you do it the best, and we really appreciate you. I'm being serious. I mean, we haven't met. So, ladies and gentlemen, you and I have not shook hands, but we will certainly do that sometime. And if people haven't been to an air show, we don't want to scare you. Take a look at these different air shows, especially the aircraft that we're talking about here. American exceptionalism, living history, and that goes into the history books. Bill, thank you so much for your time, and we'll do it again soon.
Always.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you so much. And Happy New Year to you as we move into this new period, 2026. Hope it's a great year for all of us.
And Happy New Year to everybody who's out there listening to us at this hour.
Blessings, Bill. Thank you for being with us. When we come back, hour number 2, we come to another of our special authors and journalists, Rod Pyle. He's been a regular here, and he's a go-to guy for me, and hopefully you, ladies and gentlemen, as we talk about many of the things that are happening in the world of space. And the big news, as you hear on Talk Radio 77 WABC from the great news department, what's going to happen with the return of this particular crew from the International Space Station, a medical emergency, but we don't know who. And we'll certainly talk about that with Rod Pyle. We'll be right back after these important announcements.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We're back on the air with the Dr. Sky Experience, another adventure on this particular radio archive, which we call Theater of the Mind. Our goal is to open the minds of many out there, yes indeed, ladies and gentlemen, on the many mysteries of the universe that we live in, but more importantly, here on this blowtorch of radiant energy, Talk Radio 77 WABC. To get in touch with our special guest, your questions and comments, the contact number is 1-800-848-9222, 1-800-848-9222. And many thanks to our helmsmen that navigate this powerful blowtorch signal. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, thanks, many thanks to Tony and Bill, behind the scenes, making sure that the sound and the quality of what you're hearing is what you would expect. We continue now to discuss with a regular guest what's happening in the world of space. And you've been hearing all updates if you've been following the regular mainstream news, television, radio, and what have you, particularly here with the WABC News Department, reporting about something happening on the International Space Station. A medical emergency, something we haven't heard about in a long time. And hopefully that is, we pray that everybody will be well, and we don't know exactly what's going on up there. But our special guest is Rod Pyle. He's an author, journalist, television producer, and editor-in-chief of Ad Astra magazine. He's written many books on space history, exploration, and development, including Space 2.0, Innovation the NASA Way, and Destination Mars, and writes for space-related periodicals, including Popular Science, Space.com, Live Science, and Sky at Night. Pyle co-authored the Apollo Leadership Experience for NASA's Johnson Space Center, and he's produced, directed, and written for the History Channel, Discovery, and National Geographic TV, and he's a very busy man, the host of iHeart's Cool Space News podcast. Rod Pyle, thanks for joining us. Thanks for being up. How are you?
Thanks for having me on, Doctor. It's good to talk to you again.
It's always fun. I mean, listening to you, we met a couple of years ago, never in person, but I was hearing your broadcasts on other stations around the country, and I said, hey, I got to get this guy because he knows a lot about what's happening. So let's dive right into it. The news that we've been hearing within, the last 48 hours is something going on the International Space Station. Give us an update. Tell us what you know.
Yeah, so NASA's being careful not to call it a medical emergency. Okay. I forget what term they use exactly. I think they call it medical incident. But from what we can intuit, press conference, and Jared Isaacman and a couple of other NASA senior people, including the medical director, came out and talked for about an hour. And I have to say, Isaacman, he's only been in the job as the NASA administrator for about a month, so this is a bit of a trial by fire, but I thought he did very well. He was clearly very well prepared. I think he nailed it. So from what we know, one astronaut, American astronaut, out of the 7 people up there, suffered some kind of an incident. And, when you hear that kind of thing, you think, if you've been following this for any amount of time, you think, they must have been preparing for the spacewalk and something happened during the pre-breathe because they spend a certain period of time breathing pure oxygen, and you can have problems with that with your circulatory system or respiration or something. Exactly. But apparently it wasn't that. They said that it was part during routine operations. And the only thing they would reveal for, keeping medical confidentiality, they wouldn't say the name of the astronaut or what it was. They just said it was something involved with microgravity.
Amazing.
So as you know, when you think about microgravity in human organism, it's bone loss, loss of bone density. Changes in vision, and a few other things like that are gradual and usually not serious. Now, we did have an incident many years ago where in 2019, when one astronaut developed a deep vein thrombosis, which was only discovered because they were doing a cardiovascular study, but they flew drugs up and took care of that. So this is the first time they've ever had to evacuate someone from the space station. They're going to do that on the 15th.
Well, let's describe this from the mind's eye and the bird's view, if there was such a thing, of being in space. Way up into space. We're talking, about 260 miles above the Earth. This massive object that's billions of dollars of cost over the years that it's been up 25 years. Describe the station. It's pretty massive. But here's the interesting part, Rod. I'd like you to go into it. There are now 7 attached reentry craft or other spacecraft up there. And I'm looking at a diagram right here on the computer. People can, of course, check this out. You're seeing that there's all these different modules, and I'm not going to go through each one of them, but they're supposed to detach on board, the Crew 11 Dragon, which is a SpaceX manufactured product. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the Crew Dragon. So they'll come home in that, and they're only coming home about a month early, so it's not that big a deal. But like I said, it is the first time they've had to do this. Crew 12 was supposed to fly up in mid to late February, but they're going to try and push that up a little bit so they won't have too much of a gap. And when these guys, Crew 11, leaves, that will only leave 3 people behind in the space station, which is about as minimal a crew as you can have, especially, as you point out, it's 25 years old. And they spend about half their time when they're fully staffed at 7 or more just doing maintenance and repair. So, they'll have a few weeks of being very busy, and they'll have to curtail some of the research activities, I'm sure.
Yes. You brought up something interesting about microgravity, of zero gravity. And take the listeners down the path. I mean, I haven't been in that. I don't know if you've ever experienced it, other than maybe taking one of those jet rides that people can pay for.
I haven't even done that.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I don't know if I would at my age, but, and also the cost would be very prohibitive for me, and I'm not complaining. But the point I'm trying to bring up here, describe this environment of microgravity, because we say weightlessness, we're floating around there. That has a problematic thing for most people. I mean, if you're going to be up there that long, some of the things happen. Bone density changes. Maybe there's some things that we can happen with our eyes. And I've even read, please qualify this, that even when you try to sleep at night and close your eyes, you see, even if you're closed and your eyes are closed, these cosmic radiation little flashes that go on. I mean, this would drive me pretty bonkers, and maybe a lot of people. So to describe zero gravity and what you do all day long, it's hard for many people to get accustomed to this, right?
Well, that last thing you mentioned is interesting. I think it was Buzz Aldrin that first noticed that during their Gemini flight when he was during his sleep cycle, because, Buzz has a very scientific mind, and he said we close our eyes and we see these little white spots, and the only thing they could figure is that they're cosmic ray hits passing through your eyelids or your skull, and somehow when that hits the optic nerve, it activates it, and you get these little white spots. Once you get into orbit, of course, there's tremendous G-forces going up, so you're being pressed back into your seat, and then once the engines shut off and you start coasting up to the space station's orbit, you're now weightless or in zero G. And about half the people get nauseated, and a smaller percentage of them will often actually vomit because of the kind of disconnect between the inner ear and what the body's experiencing, because suddenly all these fluids are no longer being held down where they belong with one gravity. They're floating around and confusing the heck out of your nervous system. So that's the first thing that happens. But you're right, over time, you see bone density loss, which is why they exercise 2.5 hours a day on average. Wouldn't that get us in great shape? And,
I could use a little. Yeah.
Yeah, I could too. There's been some reports, although the populations they study are so small, especially for radiation, because the space station doesn't experience a lot of radiation. It's more than we do on the ground, but it's still underneath the magnetosphere that Earth projects, so it's generally protected from most of the severe radiation out there. When the Apollo crews are going back and forth, they tried to do some studies of cardiovascular issues and potential issues with the brain, with degradation of the brain, and in particular heart tissue, but none of those have been conclusive, but that may be part of it. The one really weird one is, and they think it's possibly because, when you're weightless, all the fluid in your body collects in the middle, right? So instead of being down your legs where you're used to it, it comes up into your torso and your chest and into your head. So they will usually report feeling very congested. Their sense of taste tends to go away. But it appears to distend the eyes with pressure coming in from the back of the brain into the eye cavity where the eyeball is. And it actually causes blurry vision almost exclusively in men for some reason. There's something
That's amazing.
about the structure of our skulls. Yeah. And about half the time it goes back to normal once they land, and the rest of the time it doesn't. But those are kind of the main things. So again, there's a big question mark here, and they're not going to tell us. And in fact, that 2019 incident with the thrombosis, they still haven't released the identity of who that was. So these are all very carefully guarded things.
Rod Pyle is our special guest, ladies and gentlemen. He's our go-to guy. He, of course, an author, journalist, television producer. The beat goes on. Your questions and many of the things that are happening in the world of space, it's your opportunity. We're going for this whole hour with him, and we're privileged and honored to call him a friend of the show. The contact number, 1-800-848-9222. We certainly appreciate all of you out there on these interesting stories of space. Rod, this is fascinating. I'm also hearing, too, more current now news, that the space station's deorbit might be around the year 2031. Who knows? What say you? It's not going to be up there forever.
Yeah, so the plan is sometime between 2030, 2031, they're going to start disassembling pieces of it and bringing them down. And that contract has been granted to SpaceX. They're going to set up a pusher spacecraft, another Crew Dragon, that will pull these things away from the space station and nudge them into a deorbit trajectory. It's going to be quite a show from the ground because these are big hunks of metal, you know. I mean, they're aerospace objects, so they're thin. They don't have as much mass as something solid would, but they certainly are large enough that they're going to make quite a show. And they'll all be sent down. They'll be aimed so that they'll eventually end up in this big patch of the Central Pacific, which they kind of call the spacecraft graveyard, which is where these things tend to go.
Yeah, Point Nemo is what I've heard. It's this big area.
Yeah.
So don't get excited, right, Rod, of getting on any cruise ships anytime soon, because that's an area of avoidance. But I'm sure maybe we'll speculate, maybe from Tahiti in that area, if it's the time and the time is right in the night or early morning, that would be one hell of a meteor shower, wouldn't it?
It would be. And the good thing, though, for people to bear in mind is this isn't Skylab. You know, this isn't an unplanned accidental reentry. This is all going to be very carefully planned. That thing will stay up there a very long time unless these pieces are disassembled and sent back. There has been some talk by the Russians about them wanting to unplug their modules. I think they have 3. And keep them up there to do something for a future space station for them. But some of their hardware dates back to the 80s, so I don't see that happening.
Yeah, that's amazing. You know, and again, the space station is not really that high if you really look at it. I mean, from here in Arizona, I usually tell people in our programs that we do here, public programs and outreach, that the distance and height is like that of Phoenix to, let's say, Las Vegas. But if you're doing that,
drive there in 3 or 4 hours, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I wonder the mileage between, I gather, let's say this way, I'm looking at the mileage here. New York City to Buffalo, New York, if you took the, long way, we're talking 374 miles. So in simple Earth terms, the station, if you drew a straight line, is some 260 miles up. So that might be configured into, as the crow would fly, maybe the distance of New York to Buffalo, and that's how high the space station is above the Earth, which many people think is way out in outer space, but it's low Earth orbit, right?
Yeah, and there has been some talk by various groups about studies done, I should say, about how they might keep it up there. There was talk about trying to commercialize it, but so far nobody's stepped up to say they're willing to do that because it's old and creaky and like I said, there's a lot of repair required. And, the stuff that was flown up there in the late 80s was being built in the late 90s was being built in the early 90s with 80s technology. So it's pretty out of date. But as you point out, it's big, it's expensive. It's 33,000 cubic feet. So it's the size of a very large, probably 5 or 6 bedroom house. So it is a hell of an asset. And the hope is that these 3 or 4 commercial space station companies that NASA's been funding for the last few years will be able to get their facilities up there to replace it before it has to be deorbited so that work can continue.
Yes. And not to speculate, that's never our intention here when a medical issue is out there. I mean, they'll tell us when they want to tell us, and if they do want to tell us. But I understand Mike Fink is the oldest member on there right now, and he's commander. The interesting thing, I look in my archive here, Rod, and I look like I did an interview with him back when he was in Star City in Russia. I was going to say the Soviet Union. But the thing is, at that time, this is going back maybe 15 years ago. But the point is, if he's the oldest person on board, we cannot say, and we're not speculating, that just because his age, he's the one with the medical issue. Right. It could be any of the others. We don't know.
Yeah, it could be Eddie, but you're right. He is the oldest, so of course the mind naturally goes there. And it is interesting. One of the things the medical director said is we've had a really good run here. This is the first time this has happened in 25 years with all these crews. They had statistically expected to have something like this pop up on average every 3 years. But in all of the American space program, at least, this is the first time they've ever had to come back early for something like this.
Let's talk about the ride down. We get in, let's say, the 3 people that are coming back, if that's correct, or maybe 4. Is it 3 or 4? What is it, 4? 4 people?
I think it's 4, yeah.
Okay. So all 4 of us are inside the spacecraft, and now describe it. We detach from the space station, and it's not just simply dropping the lever and firing a rocket to go down like an elevator.
Right.
This takes what? A lot of time. I mean, describe the descent process, and then the dangers, not to scare our listeners out there. I've talked to some people who've come back on the Soyuz craft, and they say it was like an express elevator to hell or from hell, whichever you describe it. You're in space. The ride down must not be that easy, correct?
It can be violent. You're right. It does take a long time. It takes hours and hours because they have to orient themselves. They have to wait till they're in the right position over the Earth so that when they take that long curving trajectory down to splash down, they're going to end up in the right place. This one's going to come down off the coast of California on the 15th. I think about 3:40 in the morning, something like that. Unfortunately,
in the dark, right? In the dark. Wow.
Yeah.
There you go.
But I'll be in Texas, so I get to miss that one. But it can be a violent ride. The Soyuz is actually smaller in diameter, so I imagine it gets buffeted more. The Dragon capsule has a wider heat shield, so it's probably a little less violent, and it's a much newer design aerodynamically. So I think that helps as well. But yeah, it's quite a show. I mean, they talk about waiting, and then gradually it begins to brighten up outside, and you see this big plasma bubble that's enveloping you at thousands of degrees. It's not as dangerous as coming back from the moon, which is something that they're really concerned about with the Artemis program. Yeah, because when you're coming back from Earth orbit, it's about 17,500 miles an hour that you're slowing down from, which is still a lot. Okay. When you're coming back from the moon, like the Apollo flights did, you're going about 25,000 miles an hour, so that's a lot more heat and a lot more re-entry friction.
If I were there, I would want to make very good friends with those that built the heat shield and make them my best friends when they tell me, don't you worry, Steve. When you come back, we'll guarantee that your pants are not going to be on fire. I mean, that must be ridiculous, not to be funny. The temperatures on that heat shield are what? Well, above or around what? 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit? That's incredible.
I think, for the lunar reentries, about 5,000 degrees, a little less for the Earth orbital ones. But there is a story there about the Artemis heat shield that maybe we can discuss later. There's a fair amount of concern. They think they figured out how not to have a serious problem, but it's the 2 flights they've done so far, one in 2014 where they plunged back at high velocity deliberately to see what it was like at lunar speeds. And then when we did this uncrewed lunar flight a year and a half ago or so, there was more erosion on it. Now, this is not like the shuttle where you have tiles that just resist the heat. This heat shield chars, and they call it ablation. It chars away, so it carries the heat with it. But bigger chunks were coming up than they had planned. And it's not the same design they used for Apollo for various reasons. The EPA won't allow them to use the same chemicals to make the heat shielding, and it was actually designed in a different pattern. Yeah, so there's some concern about that, but fingers crossed.
Well, we have a lot of space for you, ladies and gentlemen, no pun intended, 1-800-848-9222. Now's the time. If you have questions about this and many other subjects that we'll get into, and maybe your own subject about what's happening with space travel, privatizing of space, do the people on Earth really need to get off this particular planet, as many of the great astrophysicists and the great scientists have talked about? Stephen Hawking, of course, made this statement long before he passed, I should say, that we need to be off this planet due to many reasons, whether you're a climate change denier, believer, whatever. The population goes, toward 8 billion souls, and space is the exploration place. Ad astra, as they say, right, Rod? To the stars.
That's right.
1-800-848-9222. Let's shift gears if we can before we go to the hard break at the bottom. Let's talk about NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman. You gave us a little bit of a presentation on how he's handled this whole, the space situation going on medically there. This is amazing. A long time in coming for him, and it probably should have been sooner, but why not? And tell us what you might know about why there was a slow process to his confirmation.
Well, he was nominated by Trump early on, and then that nomination, as you know, was yanked. And the only reason we got for that was the quote from the White House was they discovered that he had made donations to the Democratic Party. Now, from what I've read, he made donations to both parties. But the weird thing was that's something that was obviously known way in advance. So why that suddenly became a big deal, we don't know for sure. But this was about the same time that Elon Musk and Trump had their falling out. So suspicions are that because Jared was obviously an associate of Elon's because of his 2 space flights, which he did with SpaceX in the Dragon capsule, which he paid for out of his own pocket, by the way.
Wow.
That maybe that association is a little too close for comfort. So we had Sean Duffy in there as an interim administrator. He's also the head of the Department of Transportation. So that alone, obviously, is enough work for one guy. Trying to do both didn't go as well as one would have liked. He didn't do a terrible job. He was just sort of a placeholder. And then for reasons that were never made entirely clear, Jared was renominated. And, you know, he had maintained a very positive spin throughout. Even when the nomination was yanked, he said, look, it was an honor to be considered. I stand ready to serve if asked. I mean, he was very, very clean about the whole thing. I really respected that. And there's a guy that dropped out of high school when he was 16 to start a credit card processing company and became a billionaire in short order. And also ended up building the world's largest private air force of retired military planes to do training and so forth. So he's quite a go-getter.
Absolutely. I think he's the right candidate, as many people would believe it. Think about this, ladies and gentlemen, 42 years young, a graduate, of course, as you're describing, Rod, his education. He moved on to bigger and higher things. Not necessarily does a degree guarantee anything. Many people out there are very successful, and that's amazing, and they should be given the credit that they deserve. Embry-Riddle University, Aeronautical University, as it states here, in Daytona Beach, Florida. But equally important, his ability to be in space. So if I was in part of the astronaut corps, I would want somebody that at least has the experience to know what it's like to be there and can also be a manager of an agency that, again, I'm not trying to be on a soapbox here, Rod, but comment on this. They get a minimalist amount of money from the federal government as an agency, NASA, compared to so many of the other agencies. What is it, $18-20 billion a year? That's nothing compared to some of the others, and look what they do to stretch a dollar.
Yeah, it's $24 billion as opposed to the Department of Defense, or now the Department of War, that gets closer to $1 trillion. So yeah, It's not a lot of money. And it's important to remember, we're trying to go back to the moon like we did with Apollo. We're doing so on a budget that is at 1/10 of what they're spending on Apollo at its height in the mid-60s. And back then, we had a probe headed out to Mars and something going to Venus and a handful of satellites around Earth. Now there's easily 10 times that all over the solar system.
Sure.
And we're operating the space station. So there's a lot more going on with a lot less money. So it's amazing they've been able to keep it going.
And a lot more competition from the private side with SpaceX and Jeff Bezos, of course, with Blue Origin and all these things. But what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go to that hard break in just a moment here, but still time. There's always time when we talk space for you, ladies and gentlemen. 1-800-848-9222. No question, I'm sure, is too deep for our very special guest, Rod Pyle. Rod, what's your website so people can get that as we continue here?
It's rodpylebooks.com, and there's a contact me form in there as well.
I do appreciate that. You know, we were talking before we go to the hard break about some of the things happening in the heavens right now. And Jupiter, ladies and gentlemen, we always throw in this big flavor. That's how this program started. And we talk about the many wonders of what's out there in the universe. Jupiter, still the dominant planet, closest to the Earth as of yesterday. But still, if you're looking out in clear skies, depending if you're on the West Coast, let's say, it's more toward the overhead. If you're looking, of course, on the East Coast, if it's clear, or wherever it's clear, the object may have passed the overhead point. It's the brightest object along that part of the sky, some 393 million miles away. This is a great time to observe Jupiter in a small telescope. And if you want to know the position of the satellites, go to a website called Shallow Sky Jupiter, shallowskyjupiter.com. You will be amazed at what you can see. And you can actually move the moons around by the little slide bar. So if you have a telescope, you'll be very equipped to know which of those 4 moons you're looking at. More on the Dr. Sky Experience with our special guest, Rod Pyle, author, journalist, television producer, and, of course, good friend of the Dr. Sky Experience. We'll be right back.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
33 minutes after the hour, ladies and gentlemen. If you go back in television history, how many of you remember watching on a Saturday morning or wherever you watched or whenever you watched the great story of Sky King and his beautiful aircraft and a story that lives in infamy? 34 minutes after the hour, our special guest, Rod Pyle of rodpylebooks.com. Let's go to the callers. They've been patient. Let's say good morning to Mike in Queens. Good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Yes, good evening, gentlemen, from all the cabbies at JFK Airport waiting for the 5 o'clock flight in the morning. So, anyway, straight to it. With this Skylab being brought back to Earth, why can't we just basically cannibalize it, take the existing pieces that we can use, transport them to the moon to make the first moon base, instead of dragging this stuff back up into space and recreating a moon base? I mean, it seems to me you have enough stuff in hard parts in the Skylab that you could be able to transport to the moon and at least make a little, shack or something like that as a moon base versus dragging new stuff all the way up through the process. So anyway, I'll take my answer off the phone. I'm just curious if that would be a possibility.
Thank you for calling, and I think it's an interesting one, Rod. I mean, it's maybe like taking a car and salvaging the parts and putting into another one, but it's a little more complicated, right?
Yeah, so there's a couple of problems. I mean, as I pointed out earlier, the technology is very old. It's getting kind of creaky. We've had leaks. There are a couple of cracks in the Russian segment that have yet to be repaired. So there is metal fatigue because every time, multiple times a year, a satellite will start or some piece of space debris will start heading towards the space station. They have to move the whole thing out of the way. That's a lot of stress on something that's that big and that delicate in its design. So there's that. Then you'd have to disassemble the pieces, and they were made to fit together with that bespoke technology. So anything new that you set up would have to be engineered to couple with that, which you could do. At that point, you're talking about having it in lunar orbit, who's trying to find a way to get those big pieces of hardware down to the surface without having them just impact and vaporize. It'd be very tough. You'd have to have some kind of massive landing tug that could do it. But that said, as I mentioned, there has been talk about trying to privatize or somehow repurpose what's up there or even use it as a part of a spacecraft to head off somewhere like Mars, but it just doesn't seem to be feasible at this time because it's so old.
Well, Mike, you bring up a good point. Hope your flight is successful there as you're waiting to fly out. Let's continue on with the great callers that we get here on the Dr. Sky Experience. Good morning to Al in Yonkers. Al, you're on with Rod Pyle. How you doing?
Oh, Dr. Sky, thanks for taking my call, Rod. I just wanted to mention, it's always concerning when you have a possible medical distress situation up in space. I've never been a risk taker. I really admire these individuals going in space because there's always the risk you'll never come back. Right. So I hope everything goes well in the next few days when these astronauts come back to, as you said, they would probably go land in California in the water offshore there. But I just wanted to say, I'll never forget in 1986, I was growing up in the north end of Yonkers, and I was in my local pizzeria, and I looked up, and I believe it was the Challenger. I'm not sure, but it was the teacher from New England. I think her name was Sally Ride.
No, Krista. It was Krista McAuliffe. Krista McAuliffe. Mm-hmm.
Krista, I'm sorry. Okay,
that's okay.
She was from New Hampshire. Yeah, I think she was from New England. She was a teacher.
Yes, you're right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll never forget when I watched that. I couldn't believe what I saw, but I knew what I saw was a terrible thing. That it was reality that had blown up. I was only a teenager, so I just wanted to say that that was something that always stayed with me. It was something I'll always remember where I was, just like when John Lennon was shot. Yes. And it was a terrible. So my thing is, there's always risks going into space, and this hasn't happened in a long time. So as we all, as Americans, we hope that they come back and everything goes great. Safely.
We sure do, Al. Appreciate your concerns. Rod, this is interesting here. And, I remember where I was. Everybody remembers where they were, if they're of age, when the Challenger explosion took place and the disaster. That was horrible. But I don't know. I just would hope that we've learned from those lessons, and hopefully we don't have anything like that happen again. But you never know. Space can be a dangerous place.
Yeah, it is. And, the physics are pretty brutal, both going up and coming back. So Challenger exploded in 86 during launch. Maybe what he's talking about was Columbia, which burned up during reentry in 2003 because of failure of the heat shielding. The good thing is that the technology we're using to go and return from the space station these days is in most ways a lot more robust, simpler, and safer than the shuttle. The shuttle was always a really dangerous design with a lot of single points of failure and this huge machine that was actually very delicate. The Dragon capsule is well proven. They reuse them over and over again. Eventually Boeing will get their Starliner capsule up to snuff. And again, these are just blunt bodies that re-enter heat shield down, so there's a lot less to go wrong, as long as the parachutes are in good shape. But we're talking about a medical emergency in Earth orbit. If this happens out by the moon, now you're talking about a minimum of 3 to 4 days to get home to safety.
Exactly.
If this
I never thought of it that
crew,
way. Right. You're right.
Yeah, if you're heading to Mars, if you're heading to Mars, you generally would probably not have enough fuel to do a direct abort to come back. And even if you did, that can take longer than going all the way out and coming back. So you're looking at 6 to 8 months out there and the same amount of time back. So better part of a year, sometimes more than a year, depending on where you are when something happens. So we're going to have pretty sophisticated medical operations, both on the moon and on any kind of a Mars ship, and the doctor and a surgeon and a nurse and medics and all kinds of equipment. So, humans are kind of frail things. We're basically big bags of meat and water, as you know, and you put us out in space, and space hates the human body. So you got to protect yourself. And
that's for any narcissist that thinks that we're not. You just heard the truth from Rod Pyle. You're exactly right. We're just big bags of what? What did you say? Bones and water, or not even that? What did
meat
you say?
And water.
Meat
and water.
Amazing. I had a question for you, and I know the callers, we still will get to Tom in Westchester, Bob in Yonkers, and anybody else, ladies and gentlemen, who would really like to jump in and dive in at 1-800-848-9222. But I got this question for you. I've read a lot about this, and I don't really understand it, and I've tried to. The concept of a space elevator, and simply what? Going from the ground all the way up to space, as if you're taking an elevator ride. Describe this. Is this really lunacy science fiction, or is this really a probable thing that could happen?
It's been studied to death. The barrier between the study of it and doing it is mainly material science, metallurgy, and what kind of cabling you would use. Is this some kind of carbon-based compound or what? So we don't have the technology to do it yet, but the idea is that you have a base on the ground somewhere, either on the continent or on sea, and you've got this tether, as you described, going up to geosynchronous orbit. So if you go out to about 25,000 miles above the Earth and you position a station there, it's orbiting at the exact same speed the Earth turns. So from our perspective on the Earth, it's always in the same spot overhead. So that's where a lot of communication satellites are, for instance, so that we always know where to point in the sky. So as long as that thing doesn't start losing altitude, it will stay in the same place, and it doesn't take a whole lot of energy to send something up that cable and bring it back down. So there's various groups and associations and academicians that, as I said, have been studying this for a long time. There don't seem to be any real game killers in doing it, but it's just the material science and the physics and the technology we have to advance. But if that
you've explained it well, Rod, for the time we have. But here's the confusing part to me: when you descend from orbit from the space station and you're re-entering, you're getting a lot of heat. So on the elevator, does it mean that you go extremely slow and it's minimalist heat on re-entry of an elevator, or does the elevator also go through the plasma heating as on its descent? How does that work?
My understanding is that because it's coming down from that stationary point in orbit and you can control the descent speed, as long as it's done slow enough, you wouldn't have those problems. You certainly have a change from hard vacuum to atmosphere, and there's going to be wind shear and all kinds of other problems to deal with. But in terms of atmospheric heating, I think that would be negligible from what I understand.
Right. And notice I'm not volunteering you for the first up and down ride there. That's a good one. I appreciate that.
Either of us, my friend.
No, and I'm sure many people listening, but no, it sounded just like a Star Trek type concept, which many are great.
I know.
Absolutely. These Star Trek concepts where did we get warp drive from? Where did we get all these concepts for moving through the universe? It's so amazing what Gene Roddenberry brought to the table. And again, I'm just a fan. I keep continually watching the original reruns of the original Star Trek. I think it's so fascinating. I just got through the one where Captain James Tiberius Kirk is actually in a courtroom, and that was an interesting episode for those that are into the law and legal side. There's something there for everybody. And guess what else we have for everybody? We have a break, ladies and gentlemen, on the Dr. Sky Experience. More with Rod Pyle. We got Tom in Westchester, Bob in Yonkers, and who knows, maybe somebody will chime in at 1-800-848-9222 before the top of the hour.
The Dr. Sky Experience on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Dr. Sky Experience. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
45 minutes after the hour. Thank you, Gene Simmons of KISS. A regular listener, I'm sure. How did we get that one? Huh? Isn't that incredible, Rod? What a guy. I love that guy. You know why?
What?
No, he's got everything. He's got KISS underwear, KISS jams and jellies, KISS caskets. I mean, that's a smart businessman. There you go. It's amazing.
Yeah. I wanted to mention something real quick about Star Trek. We just, in the magazine I edit, we reviewed a book called Inspired Enterprise by a guy named Glenn Swanson, who's a retired NASA historian. And it goes into exactly what you're talking about as to how Roddenberry and his cohort connected with scientists and academia and government to really try and nail stuff in Star Trek as much as they could. And of course, we look at the original series today and we go, well, that's kind of silly, here and there. Yeah. But for the time, when you think of the kind of goofy movies that were out there and shows like Lost in Space in comparison, Star Trek was a revelation.
Yeah. Well, after this radio show, ladies and gentlemen, I watched the reruns of Lost in Space, and we promised the audience something, and we're going to do it. We talked to Billy Mummy, and he wants to come on here, and we'll try to get him for a future celebrity guest interview. But let's go to Bob in Yonkers. Bob, good morning. You're on with Rod Pyle. How are you doing?
Dr. Sky, I have a legal question. If the Chinese get to the moon first, can they claim the planet for themselves?
Wow. Rod?
So that's a very interesting question, and fortunately the answer is no. We have this instrument called the Outer Space Treaty that was signed by the U.S. and the Soviet Union back in 1967. China signed on later, which says very clearly you can't claim territory or other astral bodies, so that includes the moon. However, the concern that people have and why there's a bit of a race going on between the U.S. and the Chinese to get astronauts back to the moon, the concern is that who lands first basically has first mover rights, whether they're official or not. So the idea is, in that case, everybody's aiming for the lunar South Pole because we think there's water deposits there as in the form of ice, and that could be used to make rocket fuel and so forth. So whoever lands first can declare a safety exclusion zone, which could be anywhere from hundreds of yards to a couple of miles, depending on what they're doing. This is also why both sides, us and the Chinese, are trying to get nuclear reactors up there. They are the best power supply for some place like the moon, but also if you land a nuclear reactor, you can now declare a safety zone around that. You've got this keep out area where you say, okay, this is ours. So our concern is the Chinese will pick the prime real estate, set up camp there and say, okay, stay out. This is dangerous. Let us do our thing. Yeah.
So Bob in Yonkers,
you can't claim territory.
No, sorry to cut you off, Rod. But Bob in Yonkers, no time or any time soon will there be realtors on the moon? Right there, that's amazing. You get the last word, Bob, and we'll move forward. How you doing? Okay, let's go to Greg in New Jersey. Good morning. Thanks for your patience. You're on with.
Well, yeah, I was listening to the last segment where the guy was saying, "Hey, send the stuff to the moon." Hey, you know what? Sanford and Son. Send all our junk to the moon. You have processed material, whether it's good or fallible. Oh, it's thin-skinned. There's an awful lot of excuses going, oh, it's not salvageable. Everything is usable, especially when you have processed material on the moon. You pick a place in a cave.
Sure.
Get underground so keep you away from the radiation and the waves coming in from the process. And you can process your own stuff and not have to move stuff to the moon. So So you put a little tug in orbit. You know, you get something that the shuttle can, like,
sounds good, Greg.
Inject more fuel into the tug, and the tug can calculate where it needs to be sent. Boom. You shoot it out of orbit, and, if the space agency wants to deal with that, too, they could do the same damn thing if you had a good tug in orbit, in order to bump their little satellites that are killer satellites that they already have in orbit.
Well, Greg, in my opinion, and not being funny, you ought to be working for NASA. You know why? Or some space administration in the future, because the problem, right, ladies and gentlemen, is space junk and debris. Pretty soon it's going to be a highway littered with so many particles that it could cause a lot of problems. But, Greg, let me jump it over to Rod and his response. Please continue, Rod.
So this is a slightly different twist on the conversation. So what we're talking about is, instead of repurposing a piece of the space station as a space station or as a landing module, now we're talking about using it for resources. And that does make sense. There's thousands of tons of metal orbiting the Earth because we put it there. It's already up there. It's been paid for. It's just junk. So ideally, it would be great to capture this stuff, melt it down, and repurpose it and manufacture it into new things that we need. The hard part is, you get up into orbit, these things are all moving along different trajectories at extremely high speeds. So you've got to close on it from the same trajectory, match its speed, grapple it with something, and then move it where you want it to go. And that takes a lot of energy. So probably, yes, space tugs will do it. If we're going to do it in any volume, we're going to have nuclear propulsion, which is something we haven't perfected yet. We got close in the 60s, but we canceled that program, thanks to the Nixon administration. And we haven't pursued that since in any serious way. So, yes, theoretically, it's a really good idea because that stuff's already there.
Well, Greg in New Jersey, thanks for the critical thinking. You bring up some very good points. Time is of the essence here. We thank you for your call. Let's go to Robert in North Carolina. Good morning. You've been patient. You're on with Rod Pyle.
Hi, Steve. Have you seen a centaur? That's a class of objects I found fascinating. They're intrastellar objects, and the largest one, from optical telescope observations, seems to have formed 3 or 4 rings. Mm-hmm. Is it possible we could have the newest telescope take a look at it?
Well, Robert, and before, I don't want to cut Rod off here, but that area that I've studied too, very much intently, these Centaur asteroidal bodies, there's so much going on with what I'm telling everybody about Jupiter. If you look in the sky, you see it. They're pretty much objects that, you're right, they're way out into the solar system, but they seem to have a resonance with Jupiter. And it would be interesting if not only could we see this with the James Webb, but moving on to take a look at this with spacecraft, because they are unique. And let me turn it over to Rod, because this is a multi-type answer type of situation that you're bringing up here, Robert. Very good, though.
Well, I think you know a lot more about this than I do, but I think the interest, as I understand it, these things tend to live in the outer solar system, so they've been spending most of their lives in an environment that's somewhat different from the inner solar system. But I guess the big interest with asteroids of all stripes is that you're seeing a piece of the primordial solar system, and that tells you an awful lot about the formation of how things came to be, right?
Yeah, Robert, I'm fascinated that you brought that up, because very few people I even talk about, when we talk about asteroids, that's one of the least known, other than the couple of asteroids that are supposedly locked into the Venus orbit, which is even more amazing. But you get the last word, even though time's pressing, but please continue. Oh, he's gone. Well, let's say good morning to Jim at Lake Placid. And good morning, Jim. Are you with us? No, I guess he's gone too. Well, Rod, this is interesting. Your website, rodpylebooks.com. I know we only scratched the surface on a couple of these topics that we're going to talk about, but let's talk real quickly about China. What's going on with them? They have Tiangong up there. How much of a force are they in 2026 that we have to watch? And I don't like to use the term space race all the time. You use it if you want. Are they more advanced as far as what they're doing, as far as getting goals done, like getting to the moon? Well, what say you? It's always an interesting answer.
Well, let's be clear. Their point of departure is very different than ours, because along with the Soviet Union, the United States had to invent all this stuff in the 60s and the 70s with the shuttle. Right. And the Chinese were able to reverse engineer that and basically replicate a lot of what we've done. That said, they've done a very good job of that. They've improved a lot of things. Their orbital spacecraft, the Shenzhou the one that takes them back and forth to the space station, is a licensed version of the Russian Soyuz. But again, they improved it. Now they have a new lunar capsule that they're going to be flying this year as a test flight. They've got a new moon rocket, not as big as the Saturn V. It'll take 2 launches to get all the hardware up there they need. But, they're moving along at a steady pace. They don't have these reverses between presidential administrations we do, where programs get canceled and tossed, like Mars Sample Return is dead now. They just, they make a 10-year plan and they stick with it and they spend money on it. So they are a very formidable force in this whole thing. And, they tend to pull together as a team and really make it happen. So
it's interesting, Rod. I got to ask you this really quickly. So the funding that they get is really like it's one and the same. So in other words, their military, do they differentiate between their military spending in space, or the whole, the whole shebang really is under the military anyway?
It really is. And even the private operators, like they have their own little smaller versions of the SpaceXs and Blue Origins, but they're all affiliated with the military in more or less direct ways. And of course, the government, being autocratic, has the ability to make the calls and control what happens and push this and push that down and push this up and so forth. So yes, it is really a government mandated thing. And that's, I think, why it works so well. They're very organized.
In about a minute or so, I know it's tough to always ask guests to do this, but the top space story of 2025, in your opinion, you've scoured this, you're a writer. Of course, you have so much information on this as chief editor of Ad Astra magazine. What do you think it could be for the listeners out there, in your opinion?
Well, I hate to say it, but I think the top story for us, the one that we had the most pain following, was the NASA budget. We had the thing chopped almost in half, down to $16 billion from 24. That was a White House request. It was going to preserve funding for the moon program to get astronauts back there, but pretty much wipe out space science to the tune of about 50%. So that had a lot of people concerned. There was a lot of layoffs. There were a lot of early retirements. A couple of the NASA centers were being downsized without a whole lot of forethought from what we can see. Now Congress has come back and said, nah, we're going to pass the $24 billion budget. So it looks like that's going to happen. But for 25, I think that was probably the big one for us. For 26, of course, 2026 is going to be the Artemis 2 mission, which is going to launch sometime between February and April and send 4 astronauts in a big loop past the moon. And that's going to be very exciting.
It is, and we wish them very well, because they're going to go, if I understand this correctly, beyond that area where the Apollo went to make a big swing. But imagine that, since Apollo 8, it's taken us this long to do any kind of semblance of returning back to the moon. Rod Pyle, always a privilege and honor. Your website, I'm going to say again, rodpylebooks.com. Great information, and check out his iHeart Cool Space News podcast. That's one that you're proud of doing, and we do appreciate you here on the Dr. Sky Experience. And I was going to mention in closing that one of the big stories, I thought, was about the Whitmore and Williams with the debacle with the Boeing Starliner. I mean, that story really held the news for so long with the inappropriate term that many people in the media use. The astronauts were not technically stranded, but again, who's splitting hair? They came back, and bless them and everybody else. We hope that the medical issue is one that's solvable and certainly goes into the history books as a success that could have been a disaster for an astronaut in space when they needed medical care. Thank you so much, Rod Pyle, for being with us. Always a pleasure, and we look forward to having you again. Have a good morning.
Thank you, my friend.
Always a pleasure. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps it up. Always suggestions for potential guests. We always love emails, and just generic emails themselves. My email is just DRSKY, Dr. Sky, at WABCRadio.com. And if you'd like, of course, we recommend that you go to the WABCRadio.com website to listen to past iterations of this particular web and, of course, this particular radio show. And, of course, send them out to friends and family to tell them what you think about these particular shows. And even more important, what about all the other great hosts here on this radio station? This, as we talked about before, here on this blowtorch of radiant energy, Talk Radio 77 WABC, as we pass the torch of conversation to TJ McCormick and the other side of midnight. And many thanks to owner and operator John Katsimatidis, and from the executive staff, Chad Lopez. We'll see you next week. Clear skies and good health as we move through 2026.
Thanks for listening to the Dr. Sky Experience. You can hear the Dr. Sky Experience Saturday mornings, midnight to 2 a.m. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social, on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?
Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.